Adam Schiff made a massive mistake. He thought he could silence Dan Bongino, thought he could dismiss him as a conspiracy theorist before he even spoke, thought his years as Intelligence Committee chairman would protect him. He was wrong. What happened next became the most viral congressional testimony of 2025. 250 million views in 48 hours. Because when Schiff attacked Bongino's credibility, the former Secret Service agent did something Schiff never expected. He pulled out the briefcase. Mueller report, IG report, Durham report, Senate intelligence report. The transcripts Schiff hid for 2 years. Every lie, every leak, every time Schiff told America he had evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. All documented, all proven false, all about to be exposed. You told America you had evidence of collusion. Bongino said, his voice cold and controlled. The Mueller report found none. Where is that evidence, Congressman? Schiff went pale. This is that story. Every lie, every receipt, every devastating moment. Smash that like button if you're ready for the truth. The House Intelligence Committee hearing had been on the calendar for months. Topic: FISA reform and intelligence community accountability lessons from the Durham report. It should have been routine testimony from former intelligence officials, maybe some partisan grandstanding, a few clips for the evening news. Then someone invited Dan Bongino, and Adam Schiff lost his mind. The invitation made perfect sense if you cared about actual expertise. Bongino had spent 12 years in the United States Secret Service, including assignments in the Presidential Protection Division, where he'd protected both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. Secret Service agents don't just stand around looking intimidating. They receive daily intelligence briefings, coordinate with all 17 intelligence agencies, analyze threats, and make split-second decisions based on classified information. More importantly, Bongino had spent the last 6 years researching, investigating, and writing about the exact topics this hearing was supposed to address: FISA abuse intelligence, community politicization, and the Russia investigation. He'd written 3 New York Times best-selling books on the subject: Spygate, Exonerated, and Follow the Money. He'd been called a conspiracy theorist for years for claiming the Russia investigation was based on fraud. Then the Mueller report came out. No collusion. Then the Inspector General report came out. 17 significant FISA errors. Then the Durham report came out. No predicate to even open the investigation. Bongino had been right about everything. But to Adam Schiff, Dan Bongino represented something far more dangerous than an expert witness. He represented accountability. Schiff had been the public face of the Russia collusion narrative for 3 years. As ranking member and then chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, from 2017 to 2023, he'd gone on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, any network that would have him, and proclaimed he'd seen evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia. He'd said it was more than circumstantial. He'd said it was in plain sight. He'd said it hundreds of times. And it was all a lie. The Mueller report found no evidence of conspiracy or coordination. The Senate Intelligence Committee found no evidence. The Durham report concluded the FBI never had a legitimate reason to open the investigation in the first place. Schiff had access to all the classified information. He knew there was no evidence. He'd interviewed witnesses under oath who all said there was no evidence. And he'd kept those transcripts hidden for 2 years while he went on television and lied. Now, in June 2025, Schiff was just another congressman. Republicans had taken back the House in 2024, and new Speaker Mike Johnson had made good on Kevin McCarthy's promise Adam Schiff would never sit on the Intelligence Committee again. He'd been formally censured by the House in June 2023 for misleading the American people about Russia. His security clearance had been revoked by executive order in January 2025, along with the 51 intelligence officials who'd lied about Hunter Biden's laptop. But Schiff still had his voice, his platform, his righteous indignation. And when he saw Dan Bongino's name on the witness list, he decided to use all three. The hearing room filled early that Tuesday morning. C-SPAN cameras, network correspondents, conservative and liberal media. Everyone knew Bongino and Schiff had been feuding for years, sharp exchanges on social media, dueling media appearances, Bongino calling Schiff a liar on his podcast, while Schiff dismissed Bongino as a conspiracy theorist. But they'd never been in the same room, never under oath, never with Bongino holding evidence. Bongino entered at 9:47 a.m. in a dark suit, an American flag pin on his lapel, carrying a leather briefcase that looked substantial. He moved with the economy of someone trained in executive protection, aware of his surroundings, efficient in his movements, no wasted energy. He sat at the witness table and began arranging his materials with practiced precision. A bottle of water, a legal pad, 3 pens, blue, black, red, and a briefcase full of documents organized with colored tabs, yellow, red, blue, green, orange. Committee Chairman Raja Krishnamurthy gavelled the session to order at 10:00 a.m. sharp. Standard opening remarks. Explanation of the hearing's purpose to examine reforms needed in the FISA process following the scathing Durham report released 2 years earlier. Introduction of witnesses. Bongino would testify first, followed by 2 former FBI officials and a FISA court judge. Mr. Bongino, Krishnamurthy said, "You may begin your opening statement." Bongino adjusted the microphone slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable accent of outer borough New York. Not heavy, but present, the voice of someone who'd walked beats in Brooklyn and never forgotten where he came from. "Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Committee members, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Dan Bongino, and I spent 12 years as a special agent with the United States Secret Service, 4 of those years in the Presidential Protection Division." His tone was conversational, professional, the voice of someone briefing senior officials. People often think Secret Service agents are just bodyguards. We're not. We're intelligence officers. Every day in the PPD, I received the Presidential Daily Brief alongside the President. I coordinated with the CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, and every other intelligence agency you've heard of, and several you haven't. I analyzed threat intelligence, assessed credibility of sources, evaluated the reliability of information, and made life-or-death decisions based on that analysis. He paused just for a moment. I also spent the last 6 years researching and investigating the abuse of our intelligence apparatus during and after the 2016 election. I wrote 3 books documenting what I called Spygate, the use of fraudulent FISA warrants, the politicization of intelligence, and the creation of a Russia collusion narrative that had no basis in fact. I was called a conspiracy theorist. I was attacked. I was deplatformed. I was told I was spreading dangerous disinformation. Another pause. His hand moved toward the briefcase. Then the Mueller report came out. No collusion. Then the Inspector General found 17 significant errors in the FISA warrants. Then the Durham report concluded the FBI never had a predicate to open Crossfire Hurricane in the first place. I was right about everything. And the people who called me a conspiracy theorist, point of order, Mr. Chairman. The interruption came like a thunderclap. Adam Schiff was on his feet, arm extended pointing directly at Bongino. His face carried that expression of moral outrage that had become his signature, the look of someone who cannot believe the injustice being perpetrated before his very eyes. "Mr. Chairman, I must object to this witness testifying before this committee." Chairman Krishnamurthy looked pained. "The gentleman is not, Mr. Chairman." Schiff's voice rose, cutting through the procedural objection. "This committee deals with some of the most sensitive classified information in government. We discuss intelligence sources and methods. We address matters of national security. And you've invited a right-wing podcast host who has spent years spreading conspiracy theories about our intelligence agencies." The room erupted in murmurs, gasps. A camera operator stumbled backward. Schiff's voice carried over the chaos. "Dan Bongino is a discredited conspiracy theorist. He has no expertise in intelligence matters beyond a basic Secret Service credential. He peddles lies and disinformation for profit. He's been wrong about every major intelligence story of the last decade. His presence here is an insult to every professional in the intelligence community." He turned to address Bongino directly, now abandoning any pretense of parliamentary procedure. "You spread lies about the Russia investigation. You attack our intelligence agencies. You're a propagandist for Donald Trump's authoritarian agenda. You have no business testifying before this committee about intelligence oversight, and I move that your testimony be stricken from the record before you can further damage this institution." Chairman Krishnamurthy hammered his gavel. "The gentleman from California is out of order. Mr. Bongino was properly invited and properly sworn. You will have your time to question him, but you will not interrupt his opening statement." "I'm not questioning him, Mr. Chairman. I'm questioning his credibility to testify on these matters." Schiff's voice had that practiced quality of moral certainty. "The American people deserve better than to have their intelligence oversight conducted by conspiracy theorists and right-wing propagandists." "Congressman Schiff, sit down." Krishnamurthy's voice hardened. "You are out of order. If you continue to interrupt, I will have you removed from this hearing." Schiff sat slowly dramatically, his expression radiating defiance. He'd made his point. He'd put it on record. Bongino was a conspiracy theorist, a right-wing hack, a propagandist, with no real expertise. He'd poisoned the well before Bongino could present a single fact. It was a power move, classic Schiff politics attack. First attack. Hard question. Their credibility make them defend themselves instead of making their case. At the witness table, Dan Bongino had not moved during the entire outburst. He'd watched Schiff's performance with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who'd spent 12 years evaluating threats. Not emotionally, tactically. Like watching a suspect in an interrogation room show you exactly where they're vulnerable. When the room finally quieted, when Krishnamurthy gestured for him to continue, Bongino did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a warm smile, a cop smile. The smile of someone who's been in the interview room when the suspect starts lying and you know you've got them because you have the evidence in your folder and they don't know it yet. "Congressman Schiff," he said, his voice still calm, still measured. "Thank you for that introduction, sincerely, because it gives me the opportunity to address something important, right from the start." He leaned forward slightly toward the microphone. "You said I'm a conspiracy theorist. You said I have no expertise in intelligence matters. You said I have been wrong about every major intelligence story of the last decade. You said I spread lies and disinformation. You said I'm not qualified to testify about intelligence oversight." Beat. let it hang there. So let me respond to those charges directly, Congressman, since you've made them the centerpiece of your objection to my testimony. His hand went to the briefcase, but he didn't open it yet. First, my expertise in intelligence matters. I spent 12 years as a special agent in the United States Secret Service. 4 of those years, I was assigned to the Presidential Protection Division. Do you know what that means? Congressman, it means I stood outside the Oval Office while the President received intelligence briefings. It means I traveled with the President to foreign countries and coordinated with foreign intelligence services. It means I had a top-secret Otter SCI clearance and received some of the most sensitive intelligence our government collects. His voice took on an edge. It means I worked with CIA case officers, FBI counterintelligence agents, NSA analysts, and military intelligence officers. It means I understand intelligence collection analysis and dissemination. It means I know how FISA warrants work, because I worked cases that used them. It means I understand the difference between raw intelligence and finished analysis, between confirmed reporting and uncorroborated allegations, between actual evidence and political speculation. He paused, letting it land. So when you say I have no expertise in intelligence matters, Congressman, you're not just wrong. You're insulting every Secret Service agent who has ever served in the intelligence community. We're not just bodyguards. We're federal agents. We're intelligence officers. We do the same work you claimed to oversee when you were chairman of this committee. Another pause. The room was absolutely silent. Second, you said I'm a conspiracy theorist who's been wrong about every major intelligence story. So let's review my record versus yours, Congressman. Now he opened the briefcase. The colored tabs were visible to every camera in the room. In 2018, I wrote a book called Spygate. In it, I alleged that the FBI used a fraudulent dossier to obtain FISA warrants on a Trump campaign associate. I alleged that the FBI misled the FISA court about the source of the dossier. I alleged that the entire Russia investigation was predicated on political opposition research rather than actual intelligence. I alleged that there was no real evidence of collusion. He pulled out a document with a yellow tab. I was called a conspiracy theorist, but then the Inspector General investigated. And you know what? He found 17 significant errors and omissions in the FISA applications. FBI lawyers altering evidence. The FBI failing to tell the court that the Steele dossier was paid for by the Clinton campaign. The FBI hiding exculpatory evidence. Everything I wrote was true. He pulled out another document, this one with a red tab. In 2019, I said the Mueller investigation would find no evidence of collusion. I said it on my podcast. I wrote it in my second book, Exonerated. I was attacked relentlessly. But what did Mueller find? And I quote from his report, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." He held up the Mueller report, all 448 pages of it. No collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination. Exactly what I said. Another document blue tab. In 2020, when the New York Post published the Hunter Biden laptop story, I said it was real. I said the 51 intelligence officials who called it Russian disinformation were lying. I said, Adam Schiff, that's you, Congressman, was lying when you went on CNN and said the story came from the Kremlin. I was banned from Twitter for saying the laptop was real. I was called a conspiracy theorist again. He looked up from the documents. But the laptop was real. The FBI authenticated it in December 2019. The emails were real. The story was true. And you, Congressman Schiff, lied about it. You called it Russian disinformation when you knew or should have known that it wasn't. The Director of National Intelligence told you it wasn't. But you said it anyway. One more document, green tab. And in May 2023, the Durham Report was released. 4 years of investigation, 300-plus pages of findings. And the conclusion: the FBI had no verified intelligence to justify opening Crossfire Hurricane. They used a double standard treating Clinton favorably while aggressively pursuing Trump. There was confirmation bias throughout the investigation. The intelligence community failed. Bongino set down the document and looked directly at Schiff. I wrote about all of this in 2018. I was called a conspiracy theorist. I was told I was spreading dangerous disinformation. I was attacked by you, Congressman, and by every media outlet that wanted to prop up the Russia collusion narrative. His voice hardened. But I was right. About everything. The FISA abuse, the lack of predicate, the absence of collusion, the politicization of intelligence, all of it. Every single thing I wrote has been validated by official investigations. He spread his hands over the pile of documents. So when you call me a conspiracy theorist, Congressman Schiff, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not the one who spread conspiracy theories. You are. The room went from silent to vacuum-sealed.
You told the American people for 3 years that you had seen evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia. You said it on CNN. You said it on MSNBC. You said it on ABC, CBS, NBC, and every other network that would have you. You said you'd seen evidence, more than circumstantial evidence, evidence in plain sight.
Bongino pulled out a thick folder with multiple colored tabs. But the Mueller report found no evidence. The Senate Intelligence Committee found no evidence. And we now know that witnesses you interviewed under oath, 53 witnesses, all testified that they'd seen no evidence of collusion. But you kept those transcripts secret for 2 years, while you went on television and lied. He held up the folder. I've got the transcripts right here, Congressman, the ones you tried to hide. James Clapper, no evidence. John Brennan, no evidence. Susan Rice, no evidence. Every Obama administration official, no evidence. But you knew that. You'd seen their testimony, and you lied anyway. Schiff tried to interject. Those transcripts were classified at the time. They were classified to protect you. Bongino's voice cut like a knife. They were classified because they proved you were lying. Director of National Intelligence Rick Grenell finally released them in May 2020, and they exposed your 3-year deception. He leaned back in his chair, never breaking eye contact with Schiff. So here's what's going to happen, Congressman. You've questioned my credibility. You've called me a conspiracy theorist. You've said I have no business testifying about intelligence oversight. He gestured at the briefcase full of documents. I'm going to present the evidence, every lie you told, every time you misled the American people, every abuse of your position as Intelligence Committee Chairman, every instance where you put politics ahead of truth, propaganda ahead of intelligence, and your own ambition ahead of your country. The cop's smile returned, and then the American people can decide who has credibility. The former Secret Service agent who was right about everything, or the former Intelligence Committee chairman who lied about everything. Beat, the room was a vacuum. I know what conspiracy theories look like, Congressman. I investigated actual conspiracies for 12 years as a federal agent. And I know what evidence looks like. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, but in the dead silent room, everyone heard. You're looking at evidence right now, and it says you're a liar. Dan Bongino didn't wait for permission to continue. Chairman Krishnamurthy was trying to restore some semblance of order, but Bongino had the floor, had the momentum, and had 6 years of receipts he was about to deliver. "Let's start with the Russia collusion hoax," he said, pulling out the folder with the yellow tab, "because this is where it all began. This is where you, Congressman Schiff, spent 3 years lying to the American people. This is where you abused your position, manipulated intelligence, and divided this country with a narrative you knew was false." He held up a timeline printed large enough for the cameras to see. March 2017. You appear on Meet the Press. Chuck Todd asks if you've seen evidence of collusion. Your response, and I quote, "I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now." Bongino set down the timeline and pulled out another document. May 2017, MSNBC. You say, "The Russians offered help, the campaign accepted help, the Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help." Another document. December 2017, You say, "There is plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight." He kept pulling documents, creating a pile on the witness table. January 2018, February 2018, March 2018, April 2018. Every month, sometimes multiple times per week, you went on television and told America that you had seen evidence. You were the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. You had access to all the classified intelligence. You'd interviewed dozens of witnesses under oath, and you kept saying, "I've seen evidence." Bongino looked up from the documents, his voice taking on a prosecutorial edge. "The American people trusted you, Congressman. You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You had access to information they didn't. When you said you'd seen evidence, they believed you." Millions of Americans spent 3 years believing that their president was a traitor, that he'd conspired with Russia, that the 2016 election was stolen. He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "And it was all based on your lie." Schiff tried to stand. "Mr. Chairman, this is—" "Sit down, Congressman." Krishnamurthy's voice was firm. "The witness is presenting his testimony. You'll have your turn." Bongino continued as if Schiff hadn't spoken. April 18, 2019. The Mueller report is released. 448 pages. 22 months of investigation. 2,800 subpoenas. 500 witnesses. 40 FBI agents. 19 lawyers. $40 million. He held up the report, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. And the conclusion, Volume 1, Page 2. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Bongino read it again slower, emphasizing each word. Did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. He set down the report and looked directly at Schiff. No collusion, Congressman. No conspiracy. No coordination. After 22 months of the most intensive investigation in modern political history with unlimited resources and subpoena power, Robert Mueller, who you praised as a man of integrity, found no evidence that Trump or his campaign conspired with Russia. His voice rose. So where was the evidence you said you'd seen? Where was the more than circumstantial evidence? Where was the collusion in plain sight? Where was it, Congressman Schiff? Silence. But you know what's even worse. You didn't stop lying after the Mueller report. You kept going. Bongino pulled out a new stack of documents with red tabs. March 28, 2019, 1 week after Mueller submits his report. You go on CNN and give a speech. You say, and I'm reading your exact words here, "You might think it's okay that the Trump campaign chairman offered internal polling data to a Russian intelligence officer. You might think it's okay that Donald Trump Jr. was offered dirt on Hillary Clinton as part of a Russian government effort to help the Trump campaign. You might think it's okay that Trump lied about his business dealings in Moscow. You might think that's okay. I don't think it's okay. I think it's immoral, unethical, unpatriotic, and yes, corrupt, and evidence of collusion." He set down the transcript. Evidence of collusion. You said it 1 week after Mueller found no collusion. You just kept lying. Bongino's voice carried genuine anger now. "And you want to know the most damning part of all this. You knew there was no evidence. You'd known since 2018, because you'd interviewed 53 witnesses under oath, and every single one of them told you there was no evidence." He pulled out a massive stack of transcripts, the ones Rick Grinnell had declassified and released in May 2020. "These are the transcripts of the witnesses who testified before your committee, Congressman. 53 witnesses. Sworn testimony. Conducted in 2017 and 2018. But you kept them classified until May 2020, 2.5 years. Why? Because they proved you were lying." Bongino opened the first transcript. "James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence under Obama, your witness. March 2017. Question: Do you have evidence of collusion? Answer: I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election." He threw it on the table and opened another. "Sally Yates, Deputy Attorney General, your witness. August 2017. Same question. Answer: I don't know of any evidence that would establish any criminal conduct." Another transcript. "Susan Rice, National Security Advisor, your witness. September 2017. Question about evidence of conspiracy. Answer: I don't recall intelligence that I would consider evidence to that effect." He kept going, throwing transcript after transcript on the table. Samantha Power, UN Ambassador, Ben Rhodes, Deputy National Security Advisor, John Brennan, CIA Director, all your witnesses, all Obama administration officials, all with access to the most sensitive intelligence, all testified under oath, and all of them, every single one, said they'd never seen evidence of collusion. Bongino's voice was cold, now prosecutorial. "You had this testimony, Congressman. You'd heard it. You'd been in the room. These witnesses under oath told you there was no evidence. And then you went on television and told America you'd seen evidence. That's not a mistake. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a lie. A deliberate, calculated, politically motivated lie." Schiff finally managed to get a word in. "Those witnesses testified about what they'd personally seen. The investigation was ongoing. The investigation was ongoing." Bongino interrupted, his voice sharp. "But you'd already interviewed the people who would have known. The Director of National Intelligence, the CIA Director, the National Security Advisor, the people who saw everything, and they all said no evidence." He pulled out another document. "But it gets worse, because you didn't just lie, you actively hid the truth. These transcripts should have been released in 2018. They were investigative materials from a completed investigation, but you classified them. You kept them secret. Why?" Bongino answered his own question. Because if the American people had seen these transcripts in 2018, they would have known you were lying. They would have seen that every witness said no evidence. They would have known the Russia collusion narrative was a hoax. And you couldn't let that happen. Not before the 2018 midterms, not before Mueller finished his report, not before you'd extracted every possible political benefit from your lie. He held up an email printed from the congressional record. In May 2020, when Rick Grenell was about to release these transcripts, you sent him a letter. You tried to stop him. You claimed releasing them would harm national security. But there was nothing classified in them. Nothing that would harm sources and methods. You just didn't want the American people to see proof that you'd been lying. Bongino set down the email and pulled out yet another document. And let's talk about the Senate Intelligence Committee. Shall we? Because, while you were lying on cable news, the Senate was conducting its own investigation. Bipartisan investigation. Republican chairman, Democrat vice chair. 3 years, thousands of documents, hundreds of witnesses. He held up the 5 volumes of the Senate Intelligence Committee report. Their conclusion I'm reading from the executive summary: the committee found no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government. That's the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee. No evidence. His voice rose. So we have the Mueller report. No evidence. The Senate Intelligence Committee. No evidence. 53 witnesses testifying under oath. No evidence. And yet, you, Congressman Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, went on television hundreds of times and said you'd seen evidence. Bongino leaned forward, his cop's instincts fully engaged. You know what we called that in the Secret Service? We called it a lie. A knowing, deliberate, provable lie. And when a federal official lies about intelligence matters, especially when they hold a position of trust like Intelligence Committee chairman, that's not just unethical. In some contexts, it's criminal. He pulled out one final document with this section. Let me read you Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1001. Whoever in any matter within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislative, or judicial branch knowingly and willfully makes any materially false statement is guilty of a federal crime. Bongino set it down carefully. Now, I'm not saying you should be prosecuted under Section 1001, but I am saying that what you did lying about intelligence matters for 3 years while holding a position of oversight was a profound abuse of power. You had access to classified information. You knew the truth. And you lied to the American people for political gain. He gathered all the documents, the timeline, the transcripts, the Mueller report, the Senate report, and stacked them neatly. This was your Russia collusion hoax, Congressman. This was your 3-year lie. This was you using your position to spread propaganda, manipulate public opinion, and damage a presidency based on evidence you knew didn't exist. His voice dropped, became almost sad. Do you know what you did to this country? Families don't speak anymore because of your lie. Friendships ended. Trust in institutions was destroyed. Half the country still believes Trump colluded with Russia because you spent 3 years telling them he did. He looked directly at Schiff. You owe America an apology. You owe Trump an apology. You owe every person who believed your lies an apology. But you'll never give it. Because you're still claiming you were right. You're still saying there was collusion. You can't admit you lied. Beat. But the evidence doesn't lie, Congressman. And every official investigation, Mueller, Senate Inspector General Durham, all of them prove you're a liar. Dan Bongino pulled out a new section of documents, these marked with blue tabs, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, Not just anger at the Russia hoax, but genuine outrage at election interference. "Let's talk about October 2020, he said. "Let's talk about the Hunter Biden laptop. Because this is where you didn't just lie about past events, you actively interfered in an election. You helped suppress a true story. You destroyed an innocent man's life. And you did it all to help Joe Biden win the presidency." He held up a copy of the New York Post's October 14, 2020 front page, Biden Secret Emails. October 14, 2020. 3 weeks before the election, the New York Post publishes emails from Hunter Biden's laptop. The emails show Hunter's business dealings in Ukraine and China. They show that Joe Biden may have been involved in his son's business dealings despite his repeated denials. They show potential corruption at the highest levels. Bongino set down the newspaper. The source was John Paul MacIsaac, a computer repairman in Delaware. Hunter Biden had dropped off a laptop for repair in April 2019 and never picked it up. MacIsaac saw disturbing content on the laptop. He did what any citizen should do. He reported it to the FBI. December 2019, the FBI took the laptop. He pulled out an FBI subpoena, holding it up for the cameras. The FBI authenticated the laptop immediately. They knew it was real. They knew the emails were real. They knew this was legitimate evidence of potential corruption. But they buried it. They did nothing. And when MacIsaac realized the FBI wasn't going to act, he made a copy and eventually got it to Rudy Giuliani, who gave it to the New York Post. Bongino's voice hardened. The story was legitimate. The source was legitimate. The emails were real. This was actual journalism reporting on potential corruption by a candidate for president 3 weeks before an election. The American people had a right to know. He pulled out a new document. "But then you went on television, Congressman, and you lied." October 16, 2020. 2 days after the story broke. CNN. Wolf Blitzer asks you about the laptop. And you say, and I'm quoting your exact words, "Well, we know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for well over a year now." Bongino set down the transcript and looked directly at Schiff. "Comes from the Kremlin. You said the Hunter Biden laptop story came from the Kremlin. You called it a Russian smear campaign. You told 70 million CNN viewers that this was Russian disinformation." His voice rose, "But you had no intelligence supporting that claim. None. Do you know how I know? Because the Director of National Intelligence told us." He pulled out a statement from John Ratcliffe, who was DNI at the time. October 19, 2020. 3 days after you went on CNN and lied. DNI Ratcliffe goes on Fox News and says, I'm quoting, "Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign." Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there is no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Adam Schiff or any member of Congress that Hunter Biden's laptop is part of some Russian disinformation campaign. Bongino emphasized each word. There is no intelligence that supports that. We have shared no intelligence with Adam Schiff. The DNI, the person who oversees all 17 intelligence agencies, publicly called you out for lying. He said there was no intelligence supporting your claim. He said the intelligence community had given you nothing, suggesting Russian involvement. He set down Ratcliffe's statement. But you said it anyway. You went on national television and told America this was Russian disinformation. Why? Because you're the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee. People trusted you. When you said, "We know this comes from the Kremlin," millions of Americans believed you. Bongino pulled out another document. And then, 3 days later, you got help from your friends. October 19th, 2020. 51 former intelligence officials, including John Brennan, James Clapper, Leon Panetta, Michael Hayden, sign a letter. The letter says the laptop story has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. He held up the letter. All the classic earmarks. But then, buried in the 5th paragraph, they admit, "We want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement." Bongino's voice dripped with contempt. "We do not have evidence." They admitted it right there in the letter. But the headline in Politico the next day, Hunter Biden story, is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say. That was false. The letter never said it was Russian disinfo. It said it had earmarks of Russian disinfo, but they had no evidence. He pulled out more documents. But here's what we learned later in 2023 from congressional investigations. That letter didn't just happen organically. It was orchestrated. Antony Blinken, Joe Biden's campaign advisor, now Secretary of State, he called Michael Morell one of the signers. He prompted the letter. This was a political operation designed to give Joe Biden talking points to dismiss the laptop story. Bongino's voice rose with righteous anger. "And you, Congressman Schiff, you amplified it. You promoted it. You went on television and called it Russian disinformation, even though you had no intelligence supporting that claim. Even though the DNI publicly said there was no intelligence supporting it. You lied to help Joe Biden win the election." He pulled out social media records. And then you did something even worse. You helped censor the story. The Twitter files released in 2022 and 2023 by Matt Taibbi and others, they showed that your office contacted Twitter. Your staffers requested content removal. You pushed for account suspensions. You worked to suppress the story. Bongino held up printouts of emails and internal Twitter communications. Matt Taibbi testified before Congress in 2000. He said, your office made requests to Twitter to remove content, suspend accounts, and censor information related to your committee. Joe Rogan discussed it on his podcast. He was shocked at how comfortable government officials were with censorship. He set down the documents. Twitter ended up blocking the New York Post story. You couldn't share the link. Facebook limited its distribution. The New York Post's account was locked. One of America's oldest newspapers was censored because they reported a true story that was politically inconvenient. Bongino's voice became quieter, more dangerous. And you know who paid the price for your lie? John Paul MacIsaac, the computer repairman, the guy who just tried to do the right thing. He pulled out court documents. After you went on CNN and called this Russian disinformation, MacIsaac's life was destroyed. He was called a hacker, called a Russian asset, received death threats, had to close his business, lost everything, all because Adam Schiff went on television and lied about him. Bongino held up a lawsuit. MacIsaac sued you, Congressman, May 2022, sued you for defamation because you destroyed his life with your lies. You called him essentially a Russian agent. You ruined his reputation. You cost him his business, and you did it to protect Joe Biden. His voice filled with genuine anger. MacIsaac was a patriot. He saw something suspicious and reported it to the FBI. When the FBI buried it, he found another way to get the information out. That's what citizens are supposed to do, and you destroyed him for it. You called him a Russian asset, on national television. Bongino set down the lawsuit and pulled out more recent documents. But here's the thing about truth, Congressman. It always comes out. March 2022, 17 months after the election. The New York Times finally admits the laptop is real. They authenticate the emails. They confirm it's Hunter's laptop. Another document. March 2022. The Washington Post confirms it too. CBS News confirms it. One by one, all the media outlets that had dismissed it as Russian disinformation admit the laptop is real. The emails are real. The story was true. He pulled out FBI testimony. We later learned the FBI had authenticated the laptop in December 2019. That's 10 months before the story broke. They knew it was real the whole time. They knew it wasn't Russian disinformation. But they let you go on television and lie about it. They let the story be suppressed. They let John McIsaac be destroyed. Bongino's voice took on a prosecutorial edge. Do you understand what you did, Congressman? You interfered in a presidential election. You helped suppress true information about a candidate's potential corruption. You used your position as a former Intelligence Committee chairman to lie about national security matters. You called a true story Russian disinformation when you had no evidence, when the DNI explicitly said there was no evidence. He pulled out polling data. After the election, polling showed that 17% of Biden voters said they would not have voted for him if they'd known about the laptop. 17%. The election was decided by 43,000 votes across 3 states. Your lie may have changed the outcome of the election. His voice dropped, became almost a whisper. You helped elect a president by lying about intelligence, by calling a true story Russian disinformation, by destroying an innocent man's life, by suppressing information the American people had a right to know. He looked directly at Schiff. That's not intelligence oversight, Congressman. That's not protecting national security. That's election interference. That's propaganda. That's using your position and your credibility to manipulate an election. Beat. And you've never apologized. You've never admitted you were wrong, even after the laptop was authenticated, even after everyone confirmed it was real. You still won't admit you lied. Bongino gathered all the documents, the New York Post story, the DNI statement, the 51 Intel officials' letter, the Twitter files, the McIsaac lawsuit, the authentication reports. This is your Hunter Biden laptop scandal, Congressman. This is you, lying about intelligence to help Joe Biden. This is you, destroying an innocent man. This is you, interfering in an election. This is you, censoring a true story. His voice was steel, and it's all documented. Every lie, every manipulation, every abuse of your position. Dan Bongino pulled out a new stack of documents, these with red tabs, and his demeanor shifted. The anger was still there, but now it was tempered with something else. The clinical precision of someone who'd spent years researching this exact topic, who'd written books about it, who knew every detail of the fraud that had been perpetrated. Now, let's talk about FISA, he said. Because this is why we're supposed to be here today. FISA reform, intelligence oversight, making sure our intelligence agencies don't abuse their power. And you, Congressman Schiff, you defended the worst FISA abuse in modern history. He held up the first FISA warrant application on Carter Page. October 21, 2016. The FBI applies for a FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page. Page was a low-level advisor to the Trump campaign. The FBI told the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that Page was a Russian agent. They said he was working with the Kremlin. They said they had probable cause to believe he was engaged in espionage. Bongino set down the application. The warrant was approved, and under the FISA two-hop rule, that meant the FBI could surveil not just Page, but anyone he contacted and anyone they contacted. 2 hops from Page covers basically the entire Trump campaign. 1 FISA warrant gave them access to everyone. He pulled out the renewal applications. They renewed it 3 times: January 2017, April 2017, June 2017. Each renewal required the FBI to tell the court that the surveillance was producing valuable intelligence, that their original allegations were holding up, that there was still probable cause. 4 FISA warrants. 12 months of surveillance on a presidential campaign. His voice hardened. But it was all based on lies. The Steele dossier. Christopher Steele, a British spy paid by the Clinton campaign to dig up dirt on Trump. He produced a dossier full of salacious, unverified allegations. The FBI knew it was political opposition research. They knew Steele was biased. They knew his information was unreliable, but they used it anyway. Bongino pulled out the infamous Nunes memo. February 2018, Congressman Devin Nunes, then chairman of this committee, releases a memo. It alleges that the FBI abused the FISA process. It says they used the Steele dossier without telling the court it was paid for by Clinton. It says they didn't disclose Steele's bias. It says they misled the court. He set down the Nunes memo and picked up another document. February 24, 2018. You, Congressman Schiff, you were ranking member at the time. You release a counter-memo. You say Nunes is lying. You say the FBI followed proper procedures. You say the FISA warrants were legitimate. You defend the FBI. You attack Nunes for allegedly compromising national security. Bongino's voice rose. You went on every network, CNN, MSNBC, everywhere. You called Nunes a liar. You said his memo was a fraud. You said the FBI had acted appropriately. You said there was no FISA abuse. He pulled out media clips holding up transcripts. CNN, February 2018. You say the Nunes v. memo is a fraud. It mischaracterizes the FISA process and attempts to undermine the Russia investigation. MSNBC, same month, the FBI and DOJ acted properly. There's no evidence of any abuse. Over and over you defended the FISA warrants. Bongino set down the clips and picked up a massive document, the Inspector General's report. December 9, 2019, Inspector General Michael Horowitz releases his report on FISA abuse. 500 pages, 18 months of investigation. And you know what he found? He flipped through pages, each one marked with sticky notes. 17 significant errors and omissions in the FISA applications. 17. The FBI withheld exculpatory evidence from the court. They didn't tell the court the Steele dossier was paid for by Clinton's campaign. They didn't tell the court that Steele's primary subsource told them the dossier was based on bar talk and speculation. They didn't tell the court that Page had actually been helping the CIA, not the Russians. His voice was incredulous. And it gets worse. They altered evidence. Kevin Kleinsmith, an FBI lawyer, he took an email from the CIA that said Page was a source for them, and he changed it to say Page was not a source. He literally altered evidence to make Page look guilty instead of helpful. He committed fraud on the FISA court. Bongino held up the relevant page. Kleinsmith pleaded guilty. He was convicted of falsifying evidence. That's how serious this was. An FBI lawyer committed a federal crime to obtain a FISA warrant on a presidential campaign. He set down the IG report and pulled out Horowitz's testimony. Inspector General Horowitz testified before the Senate. He was asked, were these just innocent mistakes? His answer, these are serious errors.
17 significant errors. We found no evidence that anyone flagged them before they went to the court.
The failure of the FBI to flag them is very concerning. Bongino looked directly at Schiff. Congressman, you had access to the same information Nunes had. You sat on the Intelligence Committee. You saw the FISA applications. You knew what the FBI had told the court and what they'd hidden. When Nunes said there was abuse, you attacked him. You called him a liar. You said he was compromising national security. His voice was cold, but Nunes was right. About everything. The IG report vindicated every allegation in the Nunes memo. The FBI did use the Steele dossier without properly disclosing its source. They did hide exculpatory evidence. They did mislead the court. Everything Nunes said was true. He pulled out another document. And you know what you did after the IG report came out. Nothing. You didn't apologize to Nunes. You didn't admit you were wrong. You didn't acknowledge that you'd defended FISA fraud. Instead, you tried to spin it. You said the IG found no political bias. But that wasn't the question. The question was, did they abuse the FISA process? And the answer was, yes. Bongino's voice rose with genuine outrage. As a former federal agent, I want you to understand what the FBI did. They lied to a federal court. They withheld exculpatory evidence. They altered documents. They committed fraud. And you, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, you defended them. You attacked the people who were trying to expose it. He pulled out the final, most damning document, the Durham Report. May 15, 2023. Special Counsel John Durham releases his report. 4 years of investigation, 300 pages, and his conclusion is devastating. Bongino read from the executive summary, based on the review of Crossfire Hurricane and related intelligence activities, we conclude that the department and the FBI failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law. He looked up. Failed to uphold their mission of strict fidelity to the law. That's the conclusion. They failed. They violated their duty. He continued reading, the speed and manner in which the FBI opened and conducted Crossfire Hurricane troubled us. FBI personnel displayed a cavalier attitude toward accuracy and completeness. Neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Bongino set down the report. No actual evidence of collusion. They opened the investigation with nothing. And then they got FISA warrants based on a dossier they knew was garbage.
And you defended it all, Congressman. He pulled out testimony transcripts. Durham's report details how the FBI used a double standard. Hillary Clinton's campaign did business with Russians. They paid for the Steele dossier, which came from Russian sources. But the FBI gave them a defensive briefing. They warned Clinton's people about Russian attempts to infiltrate. But Trump, they opened a full investigation. They got FISA warrants. They put spies in his campaign. Bongino's voice filled with anger. 2 campaigns, 2 standards. Clinton gets a warning. Trump gets investigated. And you, Congressman Schiff, you had oversight responsibility. You were supposed to make sure the intelligence agencies weren't being politicized. Instead, you helped politicize them. You defended their abuses. You attacked the people trying to expose the truth.
He gathered all the FISA documents, the applications, the Nunes memo, his counter-memo, the IG report, the Durham report.
This is your FISA abuse scandal, Congressman. This is you defending fraud on the FISA court. This is you attacking Nunes for telling the truth. This is you enabling the politicization of intelligence. This is you failing at the most basic responsibility of intelligence oversight. His voice dropped, became almost sad. You know what the FISA court said. After the IG report came out, they issued a rare public order. They were furious. They said the FBI had repeatedly provided false information. They said their trust had been violated. They demanded reforms. He looked at Schiff. But you never demanded reforms. You never held the FBI accountable. You defended them, because holding them accountable would have meant admitting the Russia investigation was built on fraud. And you couldn't do that. You'd spent 3 years lying about collusion. Admitting the FISA abuse would have exposed your lies. Beat. So you defended the fraud. You attacked the truth-tellers. You failed in your duty. And now we're here trying to reform FISA, trying to prevent future abuses. And you have the audacity to question my credibility. Dan Bongino gathered all the documents he'd presented so far. The Russia collusion evidence, the Hunter Biden laptop materials, the FISA abuse reports, and stacked them in a neat pile on the witness table. Then he pulled out one final folder, this one with an orange tab. "Let's talk about accountability," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a closing argument. "Because everything I've presented so far, the Russia lies, the laptop suppression, the FISA fraud defense, it's all part of a pattern of deception, a pattern of abuse, a pattern of putting politics above truth." He held up a congressional resolution. June 21st, 2023. The House of Representatives votes to censure you, Congressman. House Resolution 521. The vote was 213 to 209. You became only the third member of the House to be censured in the last 20 years. Bongino read from the resolution, "Resolved that Representative Adam Schiff is hereby censured." Representative Schiff abused his trust by saying there was evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia when he knew there was no such evidence. He looked up. Abused his trust. Those are the words your colleagues used. Not made a mistake. Not was misunderstood. Abused his trust. They found that you lied to the American people. He continued reading. Representative Schiff exploited his positions on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to encourage and excuse abusive intelligence investigations of Americans based on the false pretext of Russia collusion allegations. Bongino set down the resolution. Your own colleagues in a bipartisan committee process found that you abused your position, that you exploited your access to intelligence, that you encouraged abusive investigations. This wasn't partisan rhetoric. This was an official finding by the United States House of Representatives. He pulled out video footage from the censure ceremony. And you know what you did when they censured you. You stood in the well of the House and acted like a martyr. Your Democratic colleagues chanted shame at the Republicans. You gave a defiant speech. You said you were proud. You said you'd been effective. You never apologized. You never admitted you were wrong. Bongino's voice filled with contempt. That's pathology, Congressman. Normal people, when confronted with overwhelming evidence that they've been wrong, they apologize. They show remorse. They try to make amends. But you doubled down. You're still claiming you had evidence. You're still defending your Russia collusion narrative. He pulled out another document.
And the censure wasn't your only consequence. January 2023, Republicans take back the House. Speaker McCarthy removes you from the Intelligence Committee, permanently. He says you can't be trusted with classified information. He cites your lies about Russia, your leaking of classified information, your abuse of your position. Bongino held up McCarthy's statement. Adam Schiff has lied to the American people. He used his position to promote a debunked conspiracy theory. He cannot be trusted with America's secrets. That's the Speaker of the House, removing you from the committee you'd served on for years, because you'd proven yourself untrustworthy. He pulled out an executive order. January 20th, 2025, President Trump's first day back in office. He signs an executive order revoking security clearances. Specifically, he revokes the clearances of the 51 intelligence officials who signed the Hunter Biden laptop letter. But the order also gives authority to revoke clearances of anyone who willfully weaponized the gravitas of the intelligence community to manipulate the political process. Bongino looked directly at Schiff. Your clearance was revoked, Congressman. You lost your access to classified information. Not because of politics, because you abused your position, because you lied about intelligence matters, because you weaponized the intelligence community for partisan purposes. He set down the executive order and pulled out a new stack of documents. But let's talk about the pattern. Because the Russia hoax, the laptop, the FISA abuse, those aren't isolated incidents. They're part of how you operate. Let me give you some other examples. He held up a transcript from September 2019. The Trump-Ukraine impeachment. You're chairing the first hearing. You're under oath. You're supposed to be presenting facts. Instead, you read a fabricated version of Trump's phone call with Zelensky. You make it sound like a mob shakedown. You put words in Trump's mouth that he never said. Bongino read from the transcript. You said Trump told Zelensky, I want you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I want you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to investigate the Bidens. But Trump never said, I'm going to say this only 7 times. You made that up. You fabricated evidence in an impeachment hearing. He set down the transcript. When you got caught, you claimed it was parody, but you didn't tell anyone it was parody when you read it. You presented it as if those were Trump's actual words. That's not parody, Congressman. That's fabrication. That's fraud. Bongino pulled out more documents. And then there's the whistleblower. The Trump-Ukraine whistleblower. You went on television and said your committee had no contact with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed. That was a lie. Your staff had met with the whistleblower. You knew about the complaint before it was filed. But you lied about it on national television. He held up the contradiction Schiff's TV statement versus later testimony. When the truth came out, you claimed you should have been more clear. But you weren't unclear, Congressman. You were dishonest. You said your committee had no contact. That was false. You lied. Bongino's voice rose. Do you see the pattern? Russia collusion, you lied. FISA abuse, you lied. Hunter Biden laptop, you lied. Whistleblower contact, you lied. Trump phone call, you fabricated. Over and over and over, you've lied to the American people. He pulled out records of classified leaks. And then there are the leaks. As chairman of the Intelligence Committee, you had access to the most sensitive classified information, and you leaked it constantly to CNN, to MSNBC, to the Washington Post and New York Times. Selective leaks designed to damage Trump and promote the Russia narrative. Bongino held up a DOJ letter. The Department of Justice investigated you for leaking. They seized phone records of journalists who'd received leaks. They were trying to find out who was disclosing classified information. And the trail led to you. You claimed this was persecution. But you'd been leaking. Everyone knew it. He set down the letter. You know what we do to people who leak classified information in the intelligence community? We revoke their clearances. We investigate them. In some cases, we prosecute them. But you got to stay on the intelligence committee for years. You got promoted to chairman. You got to keep leaking. Bongino's voice filled with righteous anger. And then, and this is almost unbelievable, you wrote a book, Midnight in Washington, published in 2021. You made money off your lies. You profited from your 3-year deception. You wrote about how you stood up to Trump, how you defended democracy, how you told the truth. He held up the book. But you didn't tell the truth. You lied, repeatedly, systematically, for 3 years. And then you wrote a book and made money from it. You monetized your lies. Bongino set down the book and spread his hands over all the documents. This is who you are, Congressman Schiff. This is your record. Lie after lie after lie. Abuse after abuse after abuse. And when confronted with evidence of your lies, you never apologize. You never admit wrongdoing. You attack your accusers. You claim you're being persecuted. You play the victim. His voice dropped, became almost clinical. In law enforcement, we have a term for people like you. We call them sophisticated offenders. People who lie so often, so smoothly, that they start to believe their own lies. People who are so convinced of their own righteousness that they can't see their own corruption. People who use their intelligence and their position to manipulate others. He looked directly at Schiff. That's you, Congressman. You're a sophisticated offender. You've used your intelligence, your position, and your access to classified information to lie to the American people for years. And you've never faced real consequences. Beat. Until today. Dan Bongino stood up slowly, gathering all his documents, the yellow-tabbed Russia files, the blue-tabbed laptop materials, the red-tabbed FISA, reports the orange-tabbed censure, and pattern evidence, and arranged them in a final comprehensive stack on the witness table. The room was absolutely silent, except for the distant sound of protesters outside and the soft clicking of camera shutters. I'm going to summarize now, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 12 years as a federal agent building cases that would stand up in court. Because I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what I've presented here today. Not opinions, not partisan attacks, not speculation, evidence documented, verifiable, irrefutable. He placed both hands on the stack of documents. Congressman Adam Schiff, I've spent the last 2 hours documenting your lies, your abuses, and your betrayal of the public trust. Let me lay out the charges one more time. He began counting on his fingers. Count 1, the Russia collusion hoax. You told the American people for 3 years that you had seen evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia. You said it on every cable news network. You said you had more than circumstantial evidence. You said the evidence was in plain sight. But there was no evidence. The Mueller report found none. The Senate Intelligence Committee found none. 53 witnesses testified under oath to your committee that there was none. You had access to all this information. You knew there was no evidence, but you lied anyway. For 3 years. and you've never apologized. Second finger. Count 2. The Hunter Biden laptop suppression. 3 weeks before the 2020 election, the New York Post published a legitimate story about Hunter Biden's laptop. The story was true. The laptop was real. The FBI had authenticated it. But you went on CNN and called it Russian disinformation. You said it came from the Kremlin. You had no intelligence supporting that claim. The Director of National Intelligence publicly stated there was no intelligence supporting it. But you said it anyway. You helped suppress a true story. You destroyed John Paul McIsaac's life. You interfered in an election, and you've never apologized. Third finger. Count 3 FISA abuse defense. The FBI committed fraud on the FISA court. They used a discredited dossier. They hid exculpatory evidence. They altered documents. 17 significant errors, according to the Inspector General. Criminal conduct by an FBI lawyer. But when Devin Nunes tried to expose it, you attacked him. You called him a liar. You said the FBI had acted properly. You defended the fraud. You ran interference for corruption. And when the IG report proved Nunes was right and you were wrong, you never apologized. Fourth finger. Count 4 systematic deception. You fabricated Trump's words in an impeachment hearing. You lied about contact with the Ukraine whistleblower. You leaked classified information repeatedly. You were censured by the House. You were removed from the Intelligence Committee. Your security clearance was revoked. You wrote a book profiting from your lies. You've shown a pattern of deception that spans years and covers multiple scandals. Bongino spread his hands over the mountain of evidence. These aren't allegations, Congressman. These are documented facts. Mueller report, Senate report, IG report, Durham report, House censure resolution, DNI statements, FBI authentication, witness transcripts, your own words on video. Everything I've said today can be verified. Every claim I've made is supported by official government reports or your own documented statements. His voice took on a harder edge. You called me a conspiracy theorist at the beginning of this hearing. You questioned my credibility. You said I had no expertise in intelligence matters. You tried to have my testimony thrown out before I could present a single fact. He picked up his Secret Service credentials, but I served 12 years as a federal agent. I protected 2 presidents, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. I received daily intelligence briefings. I coordinated with every intelligence agency. I investigated financial crimes, fraud, and corruption. I held a top-secret CI clearance for over a decade. I never leaked classified information. I never lied about intelligence. I never abused my position. He set down the credentials and picked up his NYPD badge. Before that, I was a cop in Brooklyn. I worked the 75th Precinct. I arrested criminals. I testified in court. I learned to build cases based on evidence, not speculation. I learned to distinguish between truth and lies. I learned to follow the evidence wherever it leads. He set down the badge and looked directly at Schiff. And then I spent 6 years researching and writing about the Russia investigation, FISA abuse, and intelligence community politicization. I wrote 3 books. I was attacked relentlessly. I was called a conspiracy theorist. I was told I was spreading dangerous disinformation. His voice rose. But I was right. About everything. Spygate right. No collusion right. FISA abuse right. Steele dossier was garbage right. FBI misled the court right. Hunter Biden laptop was real, right? The 51 intelligence officials were lying, right? You were lying about having evidence, right? He gestured at Schiff. You were wrong about everything. Or worse, you lied about everything. Russia collusion, you lied. FISA warrants, you lied. Hunter Biden laptop, you lied. Evidence of conspiracy, you lied. Whistleblower, contact, you lied. Everything you told the American people for 3 years was false. Bongino's voice filled the room.
So when you question my credibility, Congressman, understand this. My credibility comes from being right, from following the evidence, from telling the truth, even when it was unpopular. Your credibility, or what's left of it, comes from your former position, your access to classified information, and the media's willingness to let you lie on television for
3 years without challenge. He picked up the entire stack of documents. Based on the evidence I've presented today, I believe the following actions should be taken. He pulled out a prepared recommendation list. 1. The Department of Justice should investigate you for leaking classified information. The evidence of your leaks is substantial. Federal law prohibits the unauthorized disclosure of classified information. You should face the same investigation and potential prosecution as any other government official who leaks. 2. The House Ethics Committee should conduct a comprehensive investigation into your conduct as Intelligence Committee Chairman. The censure addressed only the Russia collusion lies, but your laptop suppression, your FISA abuse defense, your fabrication in the impeachment hearing, your whistleblower lies, all of that should be investigated. 3. You should be permanently barred from ever serving on the Intelligence Committee again. Your removal in 2023 should be made permanent. You've proven you cannot be trusted with classified information. You've proven you'll politicize intelligence. You've proven you'll lie about national security matters. 4. Your book deal should be investigated for whether you used classified information improperly. You wrote about your work on the Intelligence Committee. You made money from it. The government should review whether you disclosed classified information or used your position improperly for financial gain. 5. John Paul McIsaac's defamation lawsuit against you should proceed. You destroyed an innocent man's life by calling him essentially a Russian asset on national television. He deserves his day in court. He deserves compensation for what you did to him. 6. The voters of California should reject you in any future elections. You're currently running for Senate. But based on your record of lies, your abuse of power, your betrayal of public trust, you should never hold public office again. He set down the list. Now I know what's going to happen next. You're going to claim I'm a partisan. You're going to say this is all political. You're going to accuse me of doing Trump's bidding. You're going to play the victim and claim you're being persecuted for standing up to authoritarianism. Bongino's smile was cold. But here's the thing, Congressman, I've got the receipts. Every document I've presented is authentic. Every quote I've read is accurate. Every report I've cited is official. This isn't partisan spin. This is evidence. And evidence doesn't care about your excuses. He walked around the witness table, coming to stand in the open area between the table and the committee dais, the same move that made Tulsi Gabbard so effective against Maxine Waters. It was bold, vulnerable, but also more powerful. You know what the real tragedy is. You had a chance to be a leader. You were chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You had access to the most sensitive secrets. You could have been a voice for truth, for accountability, for protecting civil liberties while maintaining security. You could have been someone who put country over party. His voice softened, became almost sad. Instead, you became a partisan hack. You used your position to spread lies. You politicized intelligence. You weaponized the FBI and the intelligence community. You destroyed innocent people's lives. You divided this country with a hoax that you knew was false. He looked directly at Schiff, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the moral authority of someone who had actually served with honor. I protected President Obama. I would have taken a bullet for him. I never leaked about him. I never lied about him. I never used my position to damage him politically. And when I left the Secret Service, I never violated my oath or betrayed the trust placed in me. Beat. You took the same oath I did, to support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance, but you didn't. You used your oath as a shield while you lied to the American people. You wrapped yourself in the flag of national security while you abused the intelligence community. You claimed to be defending democracy while you interfered in elections and suppressed true information. Bongino's voice rose to fill the room. You're not a defender of democracy, Congressman Schiff. You're a threat to it. Because when intelligence officials lie, when they politicize intelligence, when they abuse surveillance powers, when they interfere in elections, that's not democracy. That's authoritarianism. That's exactly what you claim to oppose. He gathered his briefcase and his materials. I'm not afraid of you. I've faced real threats. I've protected presidents from people who actually wanted to kill them. I've dealt with terrorists, with assassins, with actual enemies of America. You're just a congressman who lies. And your lies are catching up with you. He turned to Chairman Krishnamurthy. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to testify. Thank you for letting me present the evidence. The American people deserve to know the truth about what Adam Schiff did, about how he lied, about how he abused his position, about how he damaged this country. He turned back to Schiff one final time. Congressman Schiff, you said I'm a conspiracy theorist with no credibility. But I've just spent 2 hours presenting documented evidence of your lies. Mueller report says you lied. IG report says you defended fraud. Durham report says you promoted a baseless investigation. The DNI says you lied about the laptop. The House censured you for lying. You were removed from the Intelligence Committee for lying. Your clearance was revoked for abusing your position. His voice was steel. I'm not the conspiracy theorist, Congressman. I'm the guy who was right. You're the liar who got caught. And no amount of righteous indignation, no amount of playing the victim, no amount of claiming you were defending democracy is going to change the evidence. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the door, then stopped, turned back. The evidence speaks for itself. Every report, every investigation, every official finding. They all say the same thing. Final pause. Adam Schiff lied. And then Dan Bongino walked out of the hearing room, leaving Adam Schiff sitting in silence, surrounded by a mountain of evidence he couldn't refute, findings he couldn't deny, and a record of lies he couldn't escape. The room erupted, Democrats shouting, Republicans applauding, cameras flashing, reporters scrambling for their phones, and Schiff sat there for the first time in years with absolutely nothing to say. The explosion was thermonuclear. Before Dan Bongino had even reached the hallway outside the hearing room, before Adam Schiff could formulate a response, before Chairman Krishnamurthy could officially adjourn, the video was everywhere. C-SPAN posted the full testimony within 15 minutes. Twitter, now X, erupted. Facebook exploded. YouTube was flooded with clips and compilations. TikTok users created highlight reels. Instagram was filled with screenshots of the most devastating moments. Former Secret Service agent destroys Adam Schiff with evidence. Bongino presents Mueller report. Schiff lied about Russia collusion. Watch Adam Schiff go silent when confronted with his own lies. The most brutal congressional testimony ever recorded. Within 6 hours, 100 million views. Within 24 hours, 180 million views. Within 72 hours, 250 million views across all platforms combined. It was the single most viral congressional testimony in history. Bigger than any impeachment hearing. Bigger than any confirmation battle. Bigger than any investigative hearing. Because this wasn't partisan theater or political grandstanding. This was a former federal agent under oath methodically presenting 2 hours of documented evidence that a former Intelligence Committee chairman had lied to America for years. And Schiff couldn't respond. He tried. God knows he tried. His first statement posted to X 3 hours after the hearing. Today, I was subjected to a coordinated attack by a right-wing podcast host who has made millions spreading conspiracy theories. Dan Bongino has no credibility. He's a Trump loyalist who peddles disinformation for profit. The American people know the truth. Trump welcomed Russian interference, used it to his advantage, and sought to obstruct justice. I stand by my oversight work. The response was swift and devastating. He presented the Mueller report. Are you calling Mueller a Trump loyalist? He showed your censure resolution. Are you calling the House of Representatives a conspiracy? He quoted the IG report word for word. Are you calling the Inspector General a liar? He played videos of you saying you had evidence. Are you calling yourself fake news? 250 million views, and you still won't admit you lied. The Congressional Black Caucus stayed silent. The Progressive Caucus stayed silent. Even Nancy Pelosi, who'd defended Schiff through everything, issued only a tepid statement. Congressman Schiff has served with distinction. These are serious allegations that deserve thorough examination. That was it. No full-throated defense. No rallying the caucus. Just silence. CNN and MSNBC, the networks that had given Schiff hundreds of hours of airtime to spread his Russia collusion narrative, were forced to cover the hearing. They tried to spin it as a Republican attack, but the evidence Bongino had presented was too specific, too documented, too official. Even Jake Tapper, who'd interviewed Schiff dozens of times, looked pained during his coverage. Look, I've known Adam Schiff for years, but we have to acknowledge that the Mueller report did not find evidence of conspiracy. The Durham report was critical of the FBI. The IG found significant problems with the FISA process. These are not partisan documents. These are official government reports. The New York Times ran a piece titled, Schiff's Russia Claims Face Renewed Scrutiny. The Washington Post published an analysis, Fact-Checking Adam Schiff's Intelligence Claims. Politico wrote, The Bongino Testimony Why Democrats Aren't Rushing to Schiff's Defense. Even liberal commentators who'd championed Schiff for years found themselves unable to defend him. One MSNBC contributor admitted on air, I've watched the full testimony. Bongino presented actual documents. The Mueller report, the IG report, the Durham report, the censure resolution, the transcripts Schiff kept classified. It's all real. And it does contradict what Schiff said publicly for years. That's a problem. Within 2 weeks, Schiff's Senate campaign was in crisis. His opponent, Steve Garvey, had been trailing by 12 points. Within a week of the Bongino testimony, the race was tied. Garvey's campaign released an ad that was just clips from the hearing, Bongino reading the Mueller report, finding no evidence, then Schiff on CNN claiming he had evidence. Bongino reading the IG report's 17 errors, then Schiff defending the FISA warrants. Bongino reading the DNI's statement about the laptop, then Schiff calling it Russian disinformation. No narration, no spin, just Schiff's own words contrasted with official government findings. The ad got 50 million views in 3 days. Polling showed that 63% of California voters had seen clips from the Bongino testimony. Of those, 58% said it made them less likely to vote for Schiff. His favorables dropped from 52% to 41%. His unfavorables rose from 38% to 51%. For the first time in his political career, Adam Schiff was underwater. Republican committees in Congress moved quickly. The House Oversight Committee announced a new investigation into Schiff's conduct as Intelligence Committee chairman. Specifically, they wanted to examine his role in suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. 2. His coordination with the 51 intelligence officials who signed the laptop letter. 3. His leaking of classified information during the Russia investigation. 4. His contacts with social media companies regarding content moderation. 5. Whether he made false statements to Congress about the whistleblower, the House Judiciary Committee sent a criminal referral to the DOJ regarding potential violations of laws against leaking classified information. Even some Democrats privately admitted it was over for Schiff. He can't credibly claim to be an intelligence expert anymore, one Democratic House member told reporters on Background. Bongino dismantled him. Every claim Schiff made for 3 years, Bongino showed it was false. With official reports. You can't come back from that. The podcast episode Bongino released 5 days later became the most downloaded podcast episode in history. The Adam Schiff Hearing What I Couldn't Say got 18 million downloads in the first week. Bongino brought on Devin Nunes, Kash Patel, and John Ratcliffe, all of whom had been attacked by Schiff. They went through the evidence in even more detail. They discussed Schiff's lies, his leaks, his abuse of power. Nunes, who'd been vindicated by the IG report after Schiff attacked him for 2 years, said, "I knew Adam was lying. I sat across from him in classified briefings. I saw the same intelligence he saw. There was no evidence of collusion, but he went on TV and lied anyway. Dan Bongino did what the media should have done years ago. He held Schiff accountable with evidence." Ratcliffe, the former DNI, said, "When I publicly stated that Hunter Biden's laptop was not Russian disinformation, I was attacked by Schiff and his allies. They said I was politicizing intelligence. But I was telling the truth. Schiff was the one politicizing intelligence. He lied about the laptop. He knew it was real. The FBI had told him it was real. But he lied anyway to help Joe Biden win the election." The episode ended with Bongino saying something that resonated across America. Here's what people need to understand. Adam Schiff wasn't just wrong. He wasn't just mistaken. He lied. Deliberately. Systematically. For years. He had access to classified information that proved there was no collusion. He interviewed witnesses who said there was no evidence, but he went on television hundreds of times and told America he'd seen evidence. That's not a mistake. That's fraud. And the only reason he got away with it for so long is because the media let him. They gave him a platform. They never challenged him. They never asked for his evidence. They just let him lie. For 3 years. 60 days after the hearing, Adam Schiff held a press conference in Los Angeles. It was supposed to be about his Senate campaign, about his policy positions, about California's future. Instead, it turned into a disaster. Every question was about the Bongino testimony, about the Russia lies, about the laptop, about the censure, about his credibility. Congressman Dan Bongino presented the Mueller report showing no evidence of collusion, but you claimed for 3 years you'd seen evidence. Can you reconcile that? Congressman, the IG found 17 significant FISA errors, but you defended the warrants and attacked Nunes. Were you wrong? Congressman, the DNI said the laptop wasn't Russian disinformation, but you said it was. Will you apologize to John Paul Mac-Isaac? Congressman, the House censured you for lying. Do you have any remorse? Schiff's answers were defensive, evasive, and ultimately unsatisfying. He claimed he'd been misunderstood. He said his statements had been taken out of context. He insisted he'd been defending democracy. But he never apologized. He never admitted he was wrong. He never acknowledged his lies. The press conference lasted 23 minutes. Schiff walked off the stage without taking the last few questions. Video clips from the press conference got another 30 million views. Comments were brutal. He still won't admit he lied. Bongino destroyed him, and he knows it. This man should be in jail, not running for Senate. California, please don't elect this liar. 90 days after the hearing, Dan Bongino sat in his podcast studio in Florida, preparing for another show. His podcast had maintained its position as the #1 show in America. His social media following had exploded. He'd been invited to testify before 3 more congressional committees. But he wasn't triumphant. He was reflective. A producer knocked on the door. Dan, we've got the latest California polling. Garvey is up by 3 points. Bongino nodded. Good. Maybe California voters finally see through Schiff's lies. After the producer left, Bongino sat alone in his studio, thinking about the hearing. About standing in front of Adam Schiff and presenting 2 hours of evidence. About watching Schiff unable to respond, unable to defend himself, unable to explain away the mountain of official reports proving he'd lied. He thought about all the years he'd been called a conspiracy theorist, all the attacks, all the attempts to deplatform him, all the mainstream media figures who'd dismissed him as a crank, a hack, a right-wing propagandist. And he thought about how he'd been right, about everything. His phone buzzed. A text from John Paul Mac-Isaac, the laptop repairman. Dan, I can't thank you enough. For 3 years, people believed Schiff's lie that I was a Russian asset. My business was destroyed. My reputation was ruined. But you told the truth. You presented the evidence. People are finally understanding what was done to me. Thank you. Bongino replied, You're the patriot, John. You tried to do the right thing. Schiff destroyed you for it. But the truth always comes out. Always. He put down his phone and pulled up the podcast prep for that day's show. The topic, 3 months after the Schiff hearing, has anything changed? As he reviewed his notes, he thought about the larger meaning of what had happened. It wasn't just about Adam Schiff. It was about accountability, about whether lies could still be exposed, about whether evidence still mattered, about whether powerful people could be held to account. He started recording, folks. It's been 90 days since I testified before the House Intelligence Committee. 90 days since I presented 2 hours of evidence showing that Adam Schiff lied to America about Russia collusion, lied about the Hunter Biden laptop, defended FISA fraud, and abused his position for years. And you know what's happened. The American people have responded. 250 million views of that testimony. Schiff's Senate campaign is collapsing. He's losing in the polls. His credibility is destroyed. And that tells me something important. He paused. It tells me that truth still matters. That evidence still matters. That you can't lie to the American people forever. Schiff got away with it for 3 years. The media let him. His colleagues protected him. But eventually, the evidence caught up with him. The Mueller report, the IG report, the Durham report, the transcripts he tried to hide. All of it proved he was lying. Another pause. And here's what I learned. You don't need a PhD to understand evidence. You don't need to be a fancy lawyer or a politician. You just need to read the actual reports. Look at what Mueller said. Look at what Horowitz said. Look at what Durham said. They all said the same thing. No evidence of collusion. Serious FISA abuse. FBI misconduct. Everything I'd been saying for years. His voice took on an edge. But Adam Schiff still won't admit it. He still claims he was right. He still says he was defending democracy. He can't admit he lied. And that tells you everything you need to know about his character. When confronted with overwhelming evidence that you're wrong, a person of integrity apologizes. A person without integrity doubles down. He looked at the camera. California voters, you've got a choice. You can elect a man who lied to you for 3 years, a man who abused his position, a man who interfered in elections by suppressing true information and spreading false information, a man who was censured by the House, removed from the Intelligence Committee, and had his security clearance revoked. Or you can reject him. You can send a message that lies have consequences. Bongino wrapped up the show half an hour later. As he left the studio, his phone rang. It was a congressional staffer. Mr. Bongino, the Senate Judiciary Committee would like you to testify next month. Topic: Intelligence Community Reform and Accountability. They want you to discuss your recommendations for preventing future Adam Schiffs. Bongino smiled. Tell them yes. I've got some ideas. He hung up and walked to his car. The Florida sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He thought about his 12 years in the Secret Service, about protecting presidents, about serving with honor, about never lying, never leaking, never abusing his position. And he thought about Adam Schiff, who'd had the same opportunities to serve with honor, but had chosen deception instead. The evidence had won. Truth had prevailed. But Bongino knew the fight wasn't over. There would be other Adam Schiffs, other intelligence officials who put politics above truth, other powerful people who thought they could lie without consequences. But now they knew someone would present the evidence. Someone would hold them accountable. Someone would tell the truth, even when it was unpopular. As Bongino drove home through the Florida evening, he thought about that moment in the hearing room when he'd looked at Schiff and said, "The evidence speaks for itself. And it says, you're a liar." That moment when truth confronted power. That moment when evidence defeated propaganda. That moment when accountability caught up with corruption. That moment, Bongino thought, made everything worthwhile. Because in the end, the evidence always speaks. And the evidence said Adam Schiff had lied to America. The question now was, would America finally hold him accountable? The polls in California suggested they would.